I love Chicago. I think Chicago is fantastic for a number of things.
A lot of times you have the media over covering a lot of crime that happens in Chicago, but in Chicago with the immigration, we have a lot of it was not planned properly of how to take in the immigrants, being that we're a sanctuary city. You have our communities shifting on outside of the city limits, going into the suburbs, and we're leaving.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Roots to Riches podcast, where we talk about all things business. Today we're going to be talking about Chicago, our beautiful home city, and why we believe it is underrated and a wonderful opportunity to capitalize on if you're a new business. Here's why. Erik Cascio, our person who I work for, he's really great. He's going to talk to us today about what he thinks is going on in the belly of Chicago. All of that was bad. I just wanted to try and save myself. I'll take it again. I got to think about how I'm going to introduce you.
Just say, my co-host Erik, who has been a Chicagoan all of his life, business entrepreneur. I'd like to get his opinion on what Chicago is and what
how Chicago may evolve over the next few years to appeal to the masses as a leading city in the United States.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start over from the beginning. Hi, and welcome to today's episodes of Roots to Riches podcast, where we discuss all things business and entrepreneurship. Today I've got my co-host here, Erik Cascio, who is excited to share a bit more about our home city, Chicago, what we love about it, and where we think the city is heading for business and as it develops in the coming years. It's one of the biggest cities in the United States, but we believe it's super underrated. That being said, we feel that there is the potential for it to become the next Miami or New York, and it's certainly got a lot of things going for it. So, Erik, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what's happening in Chicago and its underbelly in terms of the local economy, politics, and what you see happening here over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think Chicago is such a beautiful and clean, big city. If you compare it to like a New York or other major cities, it's so clean. The people are very, very nice. Midwesterners tend to be extremely nice here. But I think Chicago has a massive potential to grow business and to develop other things in Chicago. It's beautiful, but I think we get a bad rap because of crime, and a lot of times you have the media over covering a lot of crime that happens in Chicago. But there are some pockets. There are a lot of neighborhoods that are very safe, very beautiful, where you can have, like any other major city, you can have a great time. You can have a great environment for business to grow. And I think it really has a lot of potential. What do you think?
I love Chicago. I think Chicago is fantastic for a number of things. I was born and raised here, so it's been a part of my personal culture and lifestyle and family for a long time. That being said, Chicago is an interesting city. It is very segregated. Every neighborhood is wildly different, and it's confusing to see in terms of the local regulations and how we set everything up such that certain pockets of the city are incredibly difficult to access. And that goes both ways in terms of the more affluent neighborhoods as well as some of the really low income neighborhoods. And so media coverage for Chicago always blows my mind and is a bit confusing for me, because I never see the crime or the violence that we see being broadcasted to us on the media. However, I do recognize that it's happening. It's just very difficult to see it in real time because the people that are experiencing it most have been structurally and economically trapped in those neighborhoods in a way that it's really difficult to break free from. And of course, the violence and the crime does have an impact on the opportunities that we can see proliferating in Chicago. But I think that, with Google really setting its roots down here in Chicago, we've got some incredible financial institutions that are based downtown, and the architecture is bar none. It really is. Definitely. And so when you're looking around the city and you're looking at how it's developing and building itself up, there's a lot of really motivated people. The lake is an incredible asset. And I don't see how it can't be one of the biggest, best places to be in terms of a new business in the Midwest, let alone the whole country.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see anything competing.
No, I see a shift in Chicago. We have issues in Chicago with the immigration. We have a lot of it was not planned properly of how to take in the immigrants, being that we're a sanctuary city. So there was a lack of planning, a lack of budgeting. The city and the state has a big deficit with their budgets. That's a big problem too, because it does not help a lot of the lower income neighborhoods that we have.
Yeah.
And so without a plan and without a proper budget to take in more population and to invest in proper infrastructure, the city is going to have challenges. But it does have a lot of exciting new companies coming on. I see there's big tech coming in Chicago, specifically in quantum companies. I see tech companies like Google and a few others coming on board. It's a really exciting time still, even with the transitions going throughout the Chicago. And the food is just amazing, right?
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. If you live in Colorado, if you live in Southwest, like the food is never going to compete. It's never going to compete. I mean, we've got pizza. We've got the Chicago style hot dog, no ketchup. We got insane Italian beef and Italian food. We've got insane Greek food. We've got the second largest Serbian and Yugoslavian population here in Chicago. Second only to, Serbia, Bosnia. I mean, I don't know. There's so many different kinds of fusions of cultures and flavors and communities that the art that comes out of this city alone is insane.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much to do. There's so much to capitalize on. And with the departure of some industries due to the pandemic and the increase of crime as a result of the riots that occurred during 2020, there's certainly some vacancies and opportunities for new business and new growth. And the one thing that I'm curious about is what is going on in terms of the politics here in Chicago that may be preventing opportunities here from taking root.
Yeah, I think we're still a pay-to-play option for doing business sometimes and getting certain contracts or certain developments in Chicago, unfortunately. But until we can clean up a little bit of the politic game, I think we can flourish. Another thing that I think is a little concerning is the amount of intake in the immigrants that are coming through with no plan, no budget to really house the immigrants that are coming through.
Yeah.
There's no real plan to get them employed. There's no real plan to get them housing. And unfortunately, our lower income neighborhoods, Black, Brown, they're experiencing a gigantic move where a lot of the immigrants are utilizing a lot of the resources, and leadership in Chicago, unfortunately, are not paying attention to what's really going on with the Black and Brown communities. And I think factor in more populations with less resources in those neighborhoods. You factor in some crime, some high crime in those areas that, the big corporations are leaving, like Walgreens and Target and Walmart. Those companies are actually leaving those low-income neighborhoods. And so with big corporations leaving, that leaves a big tax deficit when it comes to property taxes. So what happens then? Now you have lower-income homeowners that are getting 30 to 70% increase in their property taxes, and now they don't know what to do. And so I think it's a big problem. I think, unfortunately, in Chicago, the one thing that I can see from being a Chicagoan all my life, and the one thing that's going on within our communities, are we're getting driven out.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I think immigration is the new tool for gentrification.
Really?
Yeah, and how I believe that's happening is if you're flooding people that have never been here with no job, no housing, they're taking resources without a plan, without a budget.
Yeah.
You're driving crime, you're driving lack of resources, and now you have this fumble going on in our lower income neighborhoods, our black and brown specifically neighborhoods are getting impacted. And so what happens is when crime goes up, businesses tend to leave.
Yeah.
And so when there's a lack of resources, again, it's hard to attract new businesses that can come into those neighborhoods and really provide revenue for the city from a tax perspective. And now
it's risky too, also because those businesses don't know if the local population is going to drive business for them in that area.
Exactly. And so when we can't rely on those corporations for tax revenue, then you have to squeeze the individual residents of Chicagoans out. And typically it's coming from a property tax perspective where people are seeing 30 to 70% increase in taxes, which is crazy. It shouldn't even get to that point, honestly. And unfortunately, we have those communities suffering, and they have no option but to leave. Yeah. So now all of a sudden, I thought I can pay my mortgage, and now taxes go up 30, 70%. How am I going to pay my mortgage now? How am I going to pay my property taxes? I got to leave. I got to find housing that's affordable now. And so now what happens is you have our communities shifting on outside of the city limits, going into the suburbs, and we're leaving. And then now we have housing that is now selling pennies on the dollar. And guess what? Now the big corporations come in. Now the big developers come in. They swallow up all these properties, which is happening in our south side and our west side.
It's happening in my neighborhood in Wilson right now. There was just a big bill passed where it will impact the property taxes significantly. Some people are looking at property taxes tripling in their neighborhood specifically, which is unrealistic. It's totally unapproachable. It's totally it's life-changing and not in a good way. And the result is that the locals do feel as though they're being pushed out. They're not being given a lot of options. The price to rent is going up 10, 15, 20%. And that's totally changing the demographics in that community, which is ultimately what drives the strength and the culture of the community. I mean, diversity is good. Diversity due to the impacts of gentrification driving out other people that should feel comfortable and safe and welcome in their community is not okay.
Yeah, and what happens is, well, when you flood the community with people that are not from here, they don't know the language, they don't have a job, they don't have housing, you don't have a proper plan, you don't have proper budgets to help them navigate through, then what's going to happen? So the government, they're completely reliant on the government at that point. And so what happens is, as you're driving, true Chicagoan residents that can no longer afford their property due to that tax hike, they're shifted out. And Chicago has, or at least the government, municipality, they have full control over the migrants that are coming in. And all they have to do is shift them out as well. Leaving, guess what? Leaving a huge opportunity for these big developers, these big corporation hedge funds to come in and swallow up all those properties. And now you're seeing the plans. There was a $7 billion approval development happening now. There's multiple companies coming in, swallowing up all of these properties that used to be owned by Chicagoan residents. And unfortunately, they're getting driven out. And so that's what I mean when I talk about using immigration as a form of gentrification, unfortunately. And they're using immigrants to do it, unfortunately. And so I really hope that things can change. I really hope that the residents and the people of Chicago can really make a change and impact and change the way they vote, change the way they're used to doing things, because obviously leadership in Chicago is not hearing them. And the response back that I see, unfortunately, is they tell the residents, well, you should have looked at your tax bill ahead of time, or you should have attended our board meetings to make sure that your property and the community taxes were not hiked up. Honestly, come on. It's common sense that if you increase somebody's tax bill by 30 to 70%, they're not going to be able to afford it, especially in these lower income neighborhoods. It's just truly unfair. And unfortunately, the city has
the upper hand.
The city has a tone-deaf response to those residents. And so I really feel for them, and I really hope that things start to change and people start to realize, hey, you can't vote the way you've been voting before. You can't rely on the same leadership in the city that you used to. You need to change, and you need to make sure that our leaders are held accountable to all of the things that are going on in and around Chicago. And I truly believe, I love Chicago so much. I think that it has massive potential. It's just we all have to kind of get on board on the same page, the same message, and understand what's happening around us. Because hopefully, if you're listening, you can get some more perspective of what's truly happening around us in the city, and change from there. So.
Well, I know Chicago's notorious for corruption in politics, hence the name the Windy City. We all thought it was because it's actually pretty windy here, but that's not quite true.
Yeah.
And so it's disappointing to see that legacy persists.
Yeah.
However, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that, especially with respect to migration and gentrification, there is a lot going on that is very poorly organized and has had an impact on the local businesses and is driving a need for our communities to rise up and be more organized on their end in order to push forward the agendas that are going to be the most fruitful and supportive to local businesses, property owners, and members of our community.
Yeah.
I would really love to see more people getting involved in the local voting and political process, because of course, with everything happening on a national scale, this year being an election year, it is a hot topic. So many of my friends and family members are feeling really frustrated with the state of the national election.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's driving this opinion like, oh, I'm just not going to vote. I'm just not going to take action because I feel like my vote's not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that couldn't be more untrue.
Right.
But the biggest impact that we will be able to see and feel in our community starts with being involved in the local politics. That's how we get better options all the way up to the national level.
Yeah.
If we're involved, if we are keeping our attention focused on what's really going on behind the scenes, not purely relying on mainstream media to get all of the information that we see about the politicians and even things happening in a local area like in the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
Because it is stressful. It's stressful to feel like I'm going to walk down the street and get shot at. And all my family members from the suburbs will tell me
Yes.
that, they'll be like, how's it going out in Chirac? You got your bullet vest on you when you go to the CTA.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't take the red line at night, but it's fear-mongering. And it's keeping us from feeling safe, taking action to do better in our communities. And we don't have any excuse.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree on that. I think focusing on local elections will definitely impact every one of us immediately. Obviously, the presidential elections are going to impact us, but it's going to take a while for their influence, wherever it may be. It's going to take a while for their influence to come and cascade down to your local neighborhood. Yeah. But what will impact your neighborhood tomorrow is going to be who you elect as your city alderman, who you're going to elect locally in your community. Is really going to impact you tomorrow rather than maybe a year or two down the road from influence of the executive branch, the presidential election. So definitely.
So Erik, how do you think the DNC is going to impact Chicago when it comes through here in the next couple of weeks?
I think the Democratic Party is going to be a little bit surprised coming into Chicago, and I believe that there's a little shift. There's actually a major shift going on in Chicago, I think. And they're going to be surprised because I think it's going to be a mixed bag. It's not going to be the all-in cheering for the Democrats coming into Chicago. I think people are realizing that there was a mismanagement in the sanctuary cities, specifically Chicago. I think there was a mismanagement in how that was handled. I think obviously with the local residents having more of a financial responsibility with these increase in taxes, with large companies moving out of these neighborhoods, I think what used to be reliant as a voter down in Chicago isn't as reliant anymore. I think people are turning away from the Democratic Party just because of that financial impact and the mismanagement of what's happening locally here in Chicago, but probably other cities like New York and other sanctuary cities. I think there was a complete mess up in how everything is handled. And so by that, I think it's going to impact what a Democratic voter would normally have no doubt voting blue. I think they're thinking twice now, and I think they're saying, you know what, I'm tired of false promises. I'm tired of just believing the Democrats moving forward and helping me. I might want to try to move somewhere else. I might want to put my vote and hold it until maybe the last second to see, are they really going to come through? Or should I just place my vote in the opposite party? And I think that's going to eventually shift here in Chicago. And I think it's going to shift not only in Chicago, but I think it's going to shift in New York. I think it's going to shift in even as far as California, where it's traditionally all blue. I think you're going to see a mixed bag of reactions when the DNC comes here in Chicago.
That seems fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I've had a lot of friends that are disappointed with the Democratic Party and just career politicians, a lot of family dynamics, a lot of choosing what they feel is the safe choice and not the right choice. But the American people are wanting something different.
Yeah.
And the old strategies that are no longer effective, I think, in really getting to the hearts and the actions of people.
People are feeling it at the grocery stores. People are feeling it with housing and everything that they're spending their money on.
Yeah.
Your dollar doesn't go as far as it used to anymore. And, you see these shifts happening. And so I think that plays into the part of that shift. And I can tell you, back in 2020, no one even dared wear a Trump hat in Chicago. And now I'm starting to see Trump hats here in Chicago with really no effort, no second thoughts of even wearing it now.
That's wild.
Yeah, especially in Chicago.
In 2020, you'd get yourself put on the pavement if you were walking around in a MAGA hat.
Yeah, you get criticized heavily for wearing a red hat. And so now I'm starting to see more Trump hats in Chicago, of all places. And so I'm starting to see a shift. I'm sure other cities, if you're a major blue city, I'm sure you're seeing other shifts too happening around us. So, it'll be interesting once we see the DNC come here. I'm actually kind of curious of how the city is going to react because I believe there's going to be a lot of protests happening in Chicago. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of protests too. Usually when these types of conventions come through town and there's politicians in the city, all of this area, Lakeshore Drive, access to the loop, all of that gets restricted in a major way to try and mitigate crime, but it still finds a way with respect to political outrage in particular.
Yeah.
People are upset.
Yeah. But I think, again, that's a good thing because, again, that's what inspires change in a city. Right. And if we have change and if we hold our leaders responsible and accountable to the things that are happening, then there should be a shift then. Yeah. And I think it's going to go in a positive direction. I think we're going to have more economic growth. I think we should have solutions and a better plan to go about how the city is transitioning for the better.
Yeah.
And so hopefully I'm right. And I really think Chicago can be the next Miami, can be the next exciting city. And, I don't think people are going to care too much about the winters as much as people used to now. So
yeah, with global warming, where our summer goes all the way until the end of November, or the end of October. Yeah. So it's really been quite luxurious in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've probably seen over the last 5 years, our weather has been gradually changing too.
Yeah.
Like we're not having these crazy winters where we're having 12 feet of snow anymore. And Lakeshore Drive is not frozen anymore. And so I think with weather changes and climate changes, I think it's favoring in Chicago's way. I think we're slightly getting warmer. We're not getting harsh winters anymore, at least from what I remember in the last 5 or 6 years I've been living here. Yeah. And so that's been a big turnoff. Coming to Chicago is like, oh my God, I'm not going to deal with the snow. Yeah. I'm not going to deal with the cold, blistering weather.
Nobody likes to dig out the parking spot at 2 a.m.
Yeah, but I mean, our summers, no doubt, I think that we're the best city in the summer, by far.
Oh, hands down. No place in the world.
I've gone to Miami. I've gone to a lot of cities. By far, Chicago is the most beautiful place to be in the summer.
True.
Yeah, with the food. Oh, my God, yeah.
At least in the United States, for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry to everybody else, but we're the best in that regard. We won.
It's just a matter of handling the winters, really, and from there, I guess we'll kind of see how things go.
Yeah. So. Now, I don't think we have much time left, so let's wrap up. But I have one more question for you.
Sure.
As kind of looking forward with everything in mind that we discussed here today, what do you think would be the most strategic thing for business owners who are curious and interested in moving into and capitalizing on the opportunity in Chicago? What would you recommend to them they look out for, given all of these different trends that we're observing in politics with local migration, gentrification, and all of that?
Well, I think that's a very good question. It's a tough question to answer. We really have to look at where the city is wanting to invest in. And I've talked to a number of IT and cybersecurity companies. They want to see a shift coming to Chicago. They want to see grants and programs. They want to see the city really invest in certain industries so that there's an incentive to come to Chicago rather than staying in Austin or staying in Silicon Valley. So how can the city really invest into certain industries and make it an easier path for them to move here and take their business? Maybe that's from a tax perspective, but I can tell you the number one thing that most companies are talking about if they're considering moving to Chicago is, how is the crime? How are my employees going to be protected when they walk out of my building? How are our customers and clients going to come in? How are they going to feel safe doing business with us here in Chicago? Do we have proper infrastructure? Is it so hard to get to downtown because of traffic? These are questions that I would imagine that companies are asking themselves before they make the big leap to come to Chicago. Mm-hmm. And how is Chicago leadership going to support those efforts? Are they going to increase the local authorities to come in, or are they going to invest in technology that can mitigate the crime that's happening in Chicago? And I think those are the big factors right now that I would imagine that companies are looking into, they kind of go from there. I would say that would probably sum up the most big chunks of decision making for most companies.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, this has been the Roots to Riches podcast, hosted by myself, Joanna Krueger, as well as my co-host and managing partner, Erik Cascio of Golden Tree Wealth Partners. We talk all things business and entrepreneurship. We hope that these messages and these conversations will inspire you in your business and in anything that you're hoping to do that has to do with growing, scaling, and taking advantage of opportunities that are out there in the world to make your life be the best it can. So please continue to tune in, subscribe to our channel. We'll have plenty of really incredible content coming to you over the next few weeks, months, and hopefully years. So tune in, drop in. We'd love to see you. Thank you so much for watching.
Subscribe.
And take care.
Bye.